So, Amy Wu, founder of From Farms to Incubators, thank you for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Thank you for having me today.
So, what's fascinating about this show since I started in 2020 is the different paths that it's taken me on. I've attended my first two conferences in indoor farming this year. I was at Indoor AgCon in Las Vegas, and then where we met briefly at Indoor AgTech NYC in Brooklyn. What was exciting for me is just to start to meet some of my past guests firsthand and then get a feel for what's happening in the space. And I don't know what your experience has been with these conferences, but what I loved about Indoor AgTech NYC was the fact that it was single track. So we got to attend, I mean, if you were there for the whole thing, for the 2 days, you got to see pretty much everyone speak and you got to have enough time to mingle in the breakout sessions. So I'm just curious what your experience was after the conference.
Yeah, well, thank you very much again, Harry, for having me here today. It's such an honor. Yeah, and it was great seeing you at the conference. So the Indoor AgTech conference actually I thought was a real highlight of the various conferences that I've been to. Perhaps part of it is because it had been so long since I'd been to an in-person conference since the pandemic. So I would
Yeah,
say it's one of my first
yeah.
big conferences since 2020. I will say that I loved that there were just some really important discussions related to
Yeah.
the future of indoor ag tech and kind of crystal balling it. I mean, no pun intended. I guess, I did moderate the panel on the crystal ball session, which ended the conference. But it's interesting to
Sure.
take a look at some of the major issues that consumers, society are facing when it comes to food production, food supply, and how um, indoor farming, and then maybe the subset of ag tech in indoors will help address issues like that.
So I want to get into a little bit of your background for folks that are regular listeners to the show. They know I'm a big fan of origin stories. So to start with, where's home for you currently?
Home for me is in the Hudson Valley region in New York. It's about 100 miles north of New York City.
Okay.
And New York, I'm originally from New York, actually, the state. I'm a native New Yorker, East Coaster. So this is home for me.
So home for me currently is in Minneapolis, but I've only been here since 2019. Home for me is actually I would consider New York. So I grew up in Yonkers. I grew up in Yonkers, New York,
Okay. Well,
and so it's always had some very familiar with the East Coast as well. And then I was 4 years in LA as well. But so I've been in a couple of big cities. This is my first time in the Midwest, but I do have a special place in my heart for the East Coast and specifically New York and the Hudson Valley.
oh, well, thank you very much. I'm originally actually was born, raised in Westchester County, so I'm pretty familiar with Yonkers.
Yeah. I went to an all boys Catholic high school in White Plains, Archbishop Stepanak.
Okay. Yes, I'm familiar with Stepanak as well.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, from taking a look at your LinkedIn profile, your background is in journalism. Was that your intent when you went to school and just coming out of university that was your passion, that you were going to be involved in journalism from the beginning?
Well, I knew a couple things when I was in high school or even younger, middle school, was that I was encouraged to write. And I started journalism
Mm.
unintentionally when I was in middle school. And the English teacher said to me, "You're a really good writer." The assignment had been to write about a topic to the local newspaper. And I wrote a letter about the importance of Earth Day. And it was published in the local paper. My photograph is there. And I
Oh
kind of
wow.
felt like a star, like a celebrity on one hand, but I also figured out very quickly that um, writing and media gives you a lot of power to get really important issues across to a big audience. So I actually thought you could write letters to the editor for a living for a long time, and
Mm.
then realized that no, not really. I don't think anybody's made a living doing that, but you could make a living as a journalist, and it fit my
Yeah.
personality pretty well. I think I'm, in my nature is to be a curious person, and I tend to ask a lot of questions because I'm curious, genuinely curious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody once told me that there is no stupid question, and as an investigative reporter for a long time, the mantra was like, even if your mother says that you're gorgeous, check it out or something. So, I guess, there's also never a dull moment. I feel like in what I call storytelling, and
Yeah.
I was fortunate and just that a number of years ago now, I was given a phone call from an editor at the USA Today Network who said, "Do you want to write about cover agriculture and local government in the Salinas Valley?"
Mm.
And I took the opportunity. I think a lot of things in life is timing, and I accepted the opportunity, and I think
Yeah.
that's what led me on my path to writing about women innovators in agtech.
I know that from all the different jobs you've had in journalism, I saw that you worked at Gannett as well. So that just brought like a big flashback of me or my parents getting the Herald Statesman
Yeah.
delivered to their house as well. What were some of the maybe one or two highlights from your time there, and not specifically at the one job, but just your time as in journalism and specifically in investigative journalism?
So yeah, I can tie this into a little bit on the ag tech aspect of this for listeners, I think, as well. And that um, I think my background, like I said, I first covered agriculture and ag tech in Salinas, which is the vegetable bowl of the world, which the ag industry is and worth at least $10 billion, and about 85% of the leafy greens that we eat are grown there. Um, the investigative part really was in really wanting to tell untold, undertold stories. And I'm also a history major. I majored in history at NYU, and I felt strongly about giving voice to communities and to stories that just were not told. And the reason why they're not told, I find often, is because maybe mass media is not interested in them it immediately. It's too kind of esoteric. Back in 2015, ag tech was just this really weird word. Not a lot of people had heard about it. Actually, it was really, and I'm going to argue that even today, it
Yeah.
still has not hit the peak quite yet. You know, but back then in 2015, 2016, very few people, investors even had heard about ag tech. Farmers had not really too much heard about ag tech. Farmers would just be like, "Yeah, I use equipment and technology, but I don't know what you're really talking about yet." But it was starting. So the journalist in me immediately kind of observed all of this, and living in the Salinas Valley and being surrounded by farming and vegetables and being at the forefront of what I consider Salinas Valley to be one of the birthplaces for ag tech, because it's so close to Silicon Valley. A lot of intersections with investors who are also some early investors in ag tech. And there was a new center from the Western Center Growers of for Innovation and Technology that had launched for ag tech startups. So the question that emerged, was how many women innovators are in that center and how many are minorities. So I kept asking, I was just curious, like how many are led by women, how many were co-founded by women, how many of these women are women of color. And everybody who I asked kind of gave me a blank stare, like, I don't know why you're asking this, and I don't understand like what you're looking for. And I think that was what really led me to keep asking the question. And I really wanted to amplify, like I was convinced somewhere in me that there were definitely companies, startups being launched or led by women, um, who are creating innovations to tackle farming challenges. It was a strong
Hmm.
intuition. So I applied for a grant at the International Center for Journalists. They were looking for stories of minority business women owners. I mean, that's a mouthful, but anyway, it was good timing. I applied, I got the grant, and then my problem actually was a challenge was to find the women in 2 months, to
Yeah.
create a documentary and to also write some profiles. I think it was sheer persistence and drive that kind of led me to into the project.
And so I'm just curious in terms of like the thought process when you have the idea, because originally you go out there to do a story on farming in Salinas, and then obviously you have this other question now about what female found where the female representation and minority
Yeah.
representation, and it's interesting too because I'm actually Latino. I was born in El Salvador,
Mhm.
and I was conscious as I started this show, like as I started interviewing CEOs and founders, I was like, well, there's a lot of white males
Yeah.
who are telling great stories, but
Yeah.
it was just something that I was conscious of. So, and I've made a more of a concerted effort
Mhm.
to do that on this show, and I think it's something you probably discovered as well. Like you have to
Yeah.
work a little bit harder to find those stories, to find those people, to make those connections to folks.
Yeah, I can relate to what you're talking about. I mean, first of all, I don't come from a farming background. I don't come from a family of farmers, or I don't come from agriculture. I don't come from the world of food ecosystems either. I grew up in the suburbs, and I did not visit probably my first farm until I was well into my 20s, maybe even 30s. I mean, I thought a farm was just full of maybe pigs and goats, and there was going to be a tractor definitely somewhere, and a farmer in overalls and a pitchfork, or something. I mean, in other words, it's
Yeah,
a certain image. And I grew up at a time when, unfortunately, in our curriculum, we didn't have a garden. We didn't have a community garden, and we didn't, I actually thought that the food grew out of supermarket aisles for a long time. And there wasn't this real, where does my food come from? Who's growing it? So it wasn't until I was sent to the Salinas Valley that there was this emotional connection, like, oh, when I go through my supermarket aisles, when I visit and I see this bag salad, oh my gosh, it's actually like those are the people that are now harvesting it. And when I go to the supermarket now and I look at where it's being grown, I do feel this connection. And it's not just Salinas Valley, it's really across the US. Every region in the US has a special geography that is really good for certain kind of crops and certain kinds of agriculture. So I think it was just a greater appreciation for how important farming is to our livelihood, and also a real appreciation for the farmers. And it's such a timely issue because of the food supply issue that we're facing with the inflation and the rising cost of food, and the challenges to access to food now as well.
and I think the timing of this is probably at the time you started it, but it seems to be top of mind for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
I started the show in 2020 March, right when COVID hit, and it was interesting how the topic of food security, this issues with the supply chain, food deserts, all these topics started coming, to the surface, and people were having conversations, even with Ukraine,
Hmm.
access to the supply chain, impact to food supplies. It feels like now more than ever, these conversations about where our food is coming from, access to it,
Hmm.
uh, who's growing it, how sustainable
Yeah.
these supply chains are. It feels like that's a conversation a lot of people are having now.
I think, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, and also just what that had created, in terms of not just the pandemic, but now what we're seeing with inflation, and also with just the cost of shipping, transportation, with, getting the food, right, from A to B to C to D, is something that has hit all of us, our pocketbooks, basically. So consumers really care about, why is it that last, like, 5 months ago the eggs were 2.99 and now they're 4.99. It's really something that's come to life for everyone. Why are the cherries now? Why is a 1 pound cherry $15? Right. So I think that's really creating questions to people who don't even know
Yeah.
anything about farming as to why this is happening, um, and an appreciation for locally grown food as well. I see that there's a growing number of CSAs, out people subscribing to CSAs and going to farmers markets, finding and growing their own food. I think people are also growing their own food, which gets back to vertical farming and indoor farming.
So I'm curious, Amy, as when you started spending time out there and started discovering some of these women in the farming space, When did you start to piece together, what this would start to look like, and when did the idea come to you for, turning this into a film?
Well, the grant was really what created the film because I answered that call out from the International Center for Journalists for stories of minority women business owners, and I got a grant.
Yeah,
I don't know what really sparked my idea for a documentary. I think part of it was I love movies. I had never done a documentary before. What the grant afforded me was to hire a young videographer who was fresh from UC Berkeley Journalism School and who was very hungry to also work on a good
yeah,
project. So I got really lucky. I think a lot of things in life are about good timing. So the stars aligned and he did a really good job. And I also was lucky enough to find 3 or 4 women who would share their stories. So the film was an eye opener. When it first screened at the Western Center for Innovation and Technology in 2017, I created this event. My boss and I at the time at the Gannett paper, we invited community leaders, policymakers, farmers from Salinas Valley. We invited educators for this evening screening, and I invited all of the women who were in the film to sit with me, and I was the moderator. And there was just this like silence after the film screened, and I was just like, "Huh? Are people just what are they thinking? Are they just not liking it, or?" And
yeah,
then people just started to
yeah,
clap, and their hands went up, and they said, "I had no idea that there are a new generation of women who are doing this. Like, who would have known that they're creating innovations to help farmers, like tackle issues like drought, water and land management, lack of farmable soil, and women in their 20s. A lot of them were in their 20s at the time and early 30s, and they were fascinated, and these women, smart women, a lot of them from science, technology, engineering, and math. So just really wanting and passionate about tackling issues related to climate, sustainability, and also some of them were frustrated with working at companies where their ideas were just not being allowed to get out there. So they're just like, why don't I hang my own shingle? So I think, it was just really good timing to introduce this. And I didn't know what it would become. All I know is that every time the film would screen, people would just really, really just connect with it. And and then I said to myself, I got more emails and more phone calls asking me to profile more women. And then I said to myself, by 2018, I had screened the film probably 20, 30 times, and I said, I want to collect this. I want to collect the stories into the format of a book. So I had never
yeah,
written a book before, but people sometimes ask me why a book. And that's a good question because, I actually had never written a book. But the book, why a book is because I actually really wanted to have something tangible and kind of what I, in my mind, said is lasting. Maybe it'll last 20, 30 years, 40 years, but in my mind, it was more
yeah,
lasting, right? I wanted to document their voices. I wanted to get their stories out to inspire younger women, young people to say, hey, farming is not just tractors and overalls. It's not just like this image of a farmer that's not smart. Farmers are some of the smartest people I
yeah,
know. They're not just contending with weather, they're contending with science, research, you know, equipment. It's amazing. So I wanted them to pick up this book and say, maybe I can consider work and job opportunities in ag tech. So it was really meant to inspire, to document, to celebrate women. There's still not enough women in ag tech. There's still not enough money, I think, being invested in a lot of women led companies. We can talk about the reasons why I think why that's the case, but I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to at least have people start asking questions.
Well, one that I'm going to ask is is just continuing that thread. What are your thoughts about why there aren't more women in ag tech?
Well, part of it is like I noted that, traditionally agriculture the farms have been passed down from generation to generation. The land has been passed down from generation to generation, from grandfather to
Yeah,
father, fathers to sons. and really not traditionally to daughters. That's changing though, also. So part of the problem is that women, really have not been at the forefront of being. This is a very male dominated industry, agriculture, right? So when it comes to ag tech, agriculture and technology, it's not a surprise to me that there are just not a lot of investors that are investing women in women-led companies. Part of it too is that a lot of venture capital company firms, a lot of investors, the key leaders are men, right? So I think you kind of just
Yeah.
like get to know
Yeah.
the people you get to know, and you kind of like are in your circle. You're used to what you're used to. So when somebody different comes along, maybe they're younger, maybe they're a woman, maybe they look differently, maybe they're pitching an idea. I think it's just like, oh, interesting. It's something different. And whether or not people accept
Yeah.
differences, or it takes time to adapt to change. And the other issue is that I think that for a long time, there hasn't been a community for women in ag tech either. So
Hmm.
um, I think it takes connections, networking, and a community to build something bigger. So that's why Farms to Incubators has been trying to create more events. We partner with these organizations to give women the opportunity to befriend each other, connect with one another. It could be cocktails, it could be networking hour. A lot of the 30 women in my book are a community of their own, and each one of them has said, I want to connect with the other woman. 30 women time, and then it kind of snowballs, right? So I strongly believe that networking and community is critical. I also think that accelerators and incubators are also really important to
Yeah.
serve as a platform to allow women and those traditionally not in agriculture to get into the field as well. Yeah.
How much have you grown to understand and appreciate the space since starting your research for the film?
I've grown a tremendous respect for those who farm, those who are participating in the food systems. I mean, let's talk about farmers. It's just not an easy life. It's a life that they enjoy to some extent, though, because
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would really do that just to make money, a lot of money. It's very costly, everything from fertilizers to, like, I'm just trying to think, to seeds, to the equipment,
Yeah.
very expensive. You don't make much money back usually. A lot of this country is still made up of family farms. So I have a great respect for their intelligence and their passion for doing what they do. I know people farming all the way up until their 60s, 70s, 80s even.
Yeah.
And they're doing it because they just, it's like a religion to them. It's like that this is what they believe in. And then there's a new generation of younger people who are very interested in farming. They want to become farmers and own their own farms. Not because, oh, to just say I'm a farmer, but because they want to actually contribute uh, to the ecosystem, the food ecosystem. They want to use good, healthy strategies to grow food, right? They want to actually contribute back to society by producing healthy food.
Yeah. How much were you aware and did you start to educate yourself on what was happening in the indoor farming space?
So I'm going to be candid about this. I think indoor farming is still a new area for me
Yeah.
because a lot of the
Yeah.
farms that I've written about previously or I had visited were definitely not indoor farms. But I will say a couple
Yeah.
of things is that I think indoor farming um, is critical to food production. And I kind of place it in a couple of different silos. I mean, there's vertical farming, but I think there's also greenhouse, growing in greenhouses, obviously,
Yeah.
and hoop houses and so forth.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's a lot of opportunities for people, who are just want to grow their own food to grow indoors, like in a greenhouse, in their own apartments and so forth. There's
Yeah.
innovation that's going to really be needed, that is really needed to make that happen as well. I think it's an essential part of food production and supply because we're going to face a real crisis. I think
Yeah.
the food supply. I think if there's no indoor farming or ag tech along with that, we're going to be in trouble. And I think there's a real
Yeah, and I think what's been.
yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, finish that thought. Yeah, finish that thought.
And I think that is I see it as another opportunity for women, young women, to get involved in ag tech as well.
And I think probably to a guest that I've had on the show, everyone seems to be in agreement that there's no one solution that's going to fix this problem, and it's not one specific, type of indoor farm or outdoor farm. It feels like it's a concerted effort for everyone to be working together
Okay.
and figure out where their expertise lies and how they can contribute to this problem that's just going to be getting growing bigger and bigger as we deal with the issues around climate change as well.
Right.
I'm wondering, in terms of your experience at the conference, did you have a chance to check out some of the sessions? What were some of your takeaways or anything that you found that was new to you at Indoor AgTech NYC?
Well, I was invited as a moderator for the final session, so that was a very good opportunity, and I think it was a very lively discussion. Certainly from the panelists who are very high-powered panelists, I guess. All representing some of them invest in from one from Citicorp, one from Local Bounty. I mean, there are two other amazing panelists too. So what I feel like that to me was a highlight, really because it's looking forward at how does why should we care about indoor? Why should we care about indoor ag tech, right? And what is the role
Yeah.
it's going to play to our greater society? What are some of the challenges? I also want to highlight that I write a lot about agriculture from the lens of gender, Harry. So really,
Hmm.
it's really a vehicle for me to actually amplify women leaders and women entrepreneurs. So going into a conference such as Indoor AgTech, I always kind of eyeball and see, what's the participation of women, um, women-led companies, women representing their companies, women moderators. Um, I didn't see, I mean, this time I visually just didn't see a lot of women. I mean, I was definitely a woman moderator, but, you know, anyway, I feel like in general, there are definitely more women participating in ag tech. It's all a positive. And I'm hoping that in indoor ag tech, it'll be the same case in the future, because I do think that there's a lot of women bring something special. We already contribute a lot to the food systems. We're often the head of the
Yeah.
household buying and cooking the food.
Yeah.
60 to 80% of the food produced internationally, a woman plays a role in it, especially internationally, on the farm. So anyway, yeah, I'm not sure that answers your question. I'd almost like to ask you about indoor ag tech since you were there for 2 days.
Well, no, I mean, what was fascinating was the ability to hear from some of the newer opportunities that exist in this space, to meet people that are doing interesting things in space that I was not aware of. I think Stephen Ritz stole the show with his presentation from Bronx Green Machine. His energy was really interesting, but and just to see this idea, and to kind of a little bit to your point in terms of education, how inner city kids, he told the story of some of the folks that have gone through, the kids that have gone through his program, saying like, this is the first time I've ever had a salad.
Right.
Just awareness of things like that we take for granted. And I grew up in Yonkers, not exactly New York City, but I've lived in New York City as well, and I'm very aware that, to your point, growing up, you take some of these things for granted, that you think your food comes from the supermarket shelves,
Yeah.
and it is that awareness that's helpful. I'm learning a little bit more about that here. My partners got us growing veggies in our backyard, and I just made a cucumber and tomato
Oh,
salad, and
nice.
all the ingredients came from our backyard.
Nice.
And there's something. really special about this consuming
Yes.
something that you grew yourself, and I think that's a feeling that more people should have.
Yeah, that you're so nicely put. I mean, I myself am now a backyard. I consider myself a newbie, but when it comes to gardening, but I have started a garden myself, about 3 years ago, and I think it's so critical what you said about that love and that joy and that passion just to be connected to the land. I think, and also just seeing something that you produced. I mean, people put a lot of hard work into their gardens actually, and to eat from that, I think is also brings joy. So yeah, excellent point actually.
And then the other thing that I'm aware of, and I think to the extent that I can help play a role in highlighting some of these stories, that's when I saw you at the conference. I was like, I practically chased you down in the hallway
Yeah,
because I was like, I gotta make sure I get Amy because I wanted to share your story because as much as visibility as you've had with the documentary and with the book, I mean, if there's any other people that are not aware of the work that you're doing, by all means, if I have a little bit of a platform to share those stories. I go out of my way to look for women in the space as well. I reached out to Jennifer Waxman. I connected to her through your site, so I'm going to ask her to come on the show. So, always looking to tell these stories because when I think of it as, just a, minority person of color, that there's something, and then also thinking about it from the woman's perspective, there's something powerful
hmm,
in any industry when you see people that are like you doing something that you didn't know was possible. I think even if just like one
right.
little girl hears someone on the show or
Yep.
sees someone talk about farming or indoor farming or anything
Yeah.
in that space, they'll know that that's possible, which I think is very
Yeah,
powerful.
thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, from farms to incubators is a growing has gone from a documentary, gone from newspapers, a collection of newspaper stories into a book, and now actually I'm building a non for profit. It's a 501c3. It's a new young non for profit 501c3 that focuses on storytelling, building community, and also education and training. What is my goal and interest in this is that I'm really hoping that there will be more women who are at the table. It's as simple as that, really. Because, like I said, a lot of people think that farming is still really boring and it's just tractors and overalls and being in the fields. I mean, it is a lot in the fields, and that's true. And there's a lot of opportunity for work in the fields, but there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity in science and research and marketing and data and technology. I mean, you name it, you name it, and there is a place in the food system. So that's the message I'm really trying to send across. And I'm trying to do that by really amplifying women leaders and women entrepreneurs in the food space. And I'm trying to document their stories so that there's a trickle down effect of a new generation that can consider opportunities in that space as well. So really one piece leads to the other. And it's not as obvious as I'm hoping it is sometimes. I still get very people who, not young people, older people, look at me quizzically like I don't understand science, technology. Like they're supposed to be engineers, right? And I go, yes, there's a lot of opportunities in engineering, but there's also a lot of STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, math, can also equal agriculture. Well, then I get a bounce back. Well,
Yes.
agriculture, we're not a farmer. I mean, but then I say, well, the modern day farm, also includes aerial drones that take images of
Yeah.
fields. It includes
Yeah.
AI,
Yeah.
blockchain. And then I get, oh, blockchain, that's like cryptocurrency in the field, right? Yes, it's cryptocurrency, but it's also being used to trace food from the
Yeah.
field
Yeah.
to the big box store. In the in the case that, God forbid, there's some sort of contamination in the salad bags, they can trace it back to the field. So, and then there's a lot of wow. So that it's the wow, interesting that I'm kind of hoping that from farms to incubators hoping to spark. And
Yeah.
it's the from the oh wow, interesting to the exploration to then, oh, I'd like to connect with so and so. So from farms to incubators is really a hub to connect. I mean, I think of it as kind of like my, the port, where the dongle, where the USBs go in, or where you
Yeah.
charge your iPhone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think of us as that. we are connecting a lot of different kinds of devices together that are all interested actually in connecting with one another, actually. So that is what the role I
Yeah.
see my role is. That's how I see the role of this growing, this small but powerful organization is trying to put together. I'm hoping to partner with other people who share a passion for it, because I think that 10 years from now, everybody's going to know about ag tech and agri-food tech. It's just going to be part of agriculture,
Yeah.
part of food. It's questionable whether or not it's going to be its own little, oh, wow, sector. It's just going to be part of our lives.
Everyday life. Yeah, yeah. I think it's going to be more common people to be growing their food,
Yeah.
not only in their garden, but it's people in the city growing food in their kitchen, or people growing it in their garage
Yes.
with some of these grow towers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really
I was
interesting.
never, I grew up in the suburbs and I went to school in the city. And, up until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when I told people that I'm working at a farm, I write about farming, that my friends in the city would never, they wouldn't tell me they weren't interested, but they would be a little bit like, oh, okay. Okay, cool. But now it's like I'm a hot commodity. When I say that I'm in farming or in agriculture, I'm look at this, look at the sweet corn. Oh my God, it's in a husk. Like this is like gold. I mean, they're like wide eyed. They're like, let me come visit. Let me have my own farm. I mean, this is hot, and I'm hoping that it's not just going to be trendy. That actually this is going to just be permanent.
Yeah, just a way of life. Yeah, lots of good things there, and I'm just really happy to share your story because I know it's going to be inspiring for folks to learn more about the space. I'm curious, as someone who's in media, like, what was that journey like for creating a documentary? Like, how long does a process like that take? So from the moment you came up with the idea to finding the people that were going to help you on this journey, like, how long does that a process like that take?
Well, I was under a very pretty strict deadline because I had gotten a grant,
Yeah.
and I
Okay.
applied for the grant on the intuition that there was a story, and I don't think I will ever apply again like that, because I mean, if I had not found people, I would it would just not have happened. But like I said, timing
Sure.
is a lot of things in life. So I had only several months to find them, actually. And it was really, in
Wow.
the end, the executive director of the Western Growers Center for Innovation Technology, Dennis Donahue, who said, I think I have a couple of women at Trace Genomics for you to talk to. A woman named Pam Marone, who launched a company called Marone Bio Innovations, who actually mentored some women of color in the space. Dennis connected me with her, and then she just said, "Yeah, I've got two or three women too. I'm a woman also." In other words, I got lucky with connecting, and then I think the whole process was several months. But the several months was only planting the seed. It wasn't really at the actual fruition at all. The actual fruition came with me taking the film on the road and me seeing this positive response from different audiences and saying, my gosh, this needs to be screened more. We need to have more events, discussions, panels, kind of like the Indoor AgTech Summit. We need to have more gatherings. And then from there, I made
Yeah.
more connections. And then that's when I was like, I want to write a book about it. I mean, some of the screenings and gatherings drew up to about 150 to 200 people. And, we would
Wow.
fill every seat. And this was in 2018. And yeah, when I look back, it was pretty amazing. And it's kind of like now part of the history, I feel, of from farms
Yeah.
to incubators. It's part of this history that um, was essential in building it to what it is today. I've been told by a lot of people, I'm so surprised that you took this so far. And it's an interesting thing to be told, because I never, first of all, planned on taking it so far, but I feel like it was just really important to collect and amplify, like you said, when you see another woman, when you see somebody who kind of looks like you doing something really interesting, you
Mm-hmm.
feel like you might want to connect.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that you're committed to
Yeah.
doing what they're doing. It's just like, hi, how are you? Oh my gosh, like I
Yeah.
do this with book writing too. Like I had not written a book before. Well, if I see another a woman who's an Asian American writer, I'll be like, wow, cool. Like, how did you do that? Like, sometimes you just feel that connection.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. There, you want to say a little bit about the work you do at the Hudson Valley Farm Hub?
Yeah, I can certainly talk about that. That is my day job, and I think my work from Farms Incubators led me to that amazing place. I wear the hat of the communications manager there, so I'm also doing the same thing: storytelling, often taking photographs, often the person doing social media. But I will say that the work at the Hudson Valley Farm Hub truly aligns with my mission and vision, um, to use agriculture as a platform to make a positive difference in society. So, in the case
Hmm.
of the Hudson Valley Farm Hub, it is growing produce, vegetables, and distributing it to emergency food systems in the area, in the region, pantries, the SNAP programs. It's great to see
Yeah.
people who, unfortunately can't afford. I mentioned the $15 cherries, but hey, everything is expensive now, really, right? So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
it's just beautiful to see that the vegetables and the fruits are going for a really good cause. Not so that people are not just eating packaged processed foods, but local fresh foods that also they can make delicious meals out of. And there's the other component of education and training that the Hudson Valley Farm Hub is really committed to, training new farmers, people who want to farm, and that aligns very much with what I believe in. You have to train the next generation of young people to consider bringing their talents. Otherwise, nobody's going to be farming anymore. Because increasingly the farmers are
Yeah.
getting older, or if they're not old,
Yeah.
and their children might not be taking over their farms. Do we want all the farmland to go to housing development, to go to malls? I don't know. Then where are we going to grow the food? Ag land is really precious. It's like gold. So really hoping to keep that in the hands of a new generation.
Yeah, what's interesting, I think, and I've seen it some on the indoor ag side from a marketing perspective, the use of these newer platforms like TikTok to do tell stories in a visual manner and some of the social channels. And I think, some of that in a way pulls in a younger audience who's, curious about what is being shared. And I think there is some crossover where some people who are interested in a new career can see those as an opportunity. And I think to your earlier point, there's not just farmer does not mean person on the actual farm like
Yeah,
planting the seeds. And nowadays,
yeah,
with genomics, seed genomics,
yeah,
and all the data science you need, and the people working, and all the different technologies just on the indoor side, with LEDs and robotics. There's so many opportunities to enter farming nowadays
yeah,
that are not limited.
yeah.
To your point, drones and just all this new
Right,
technology that's being used
right.
to have much more success with your farm.
I mean, absolutely, that's the message I'm trying to get across, that food and farming can be sexy, basically, and it's not boring. I mean, like I noted, did not come from agriculture and farming myself. It's a passion, it's an interest, and I get asked a lot by younger people, or people like, how do I get into this? How do I explore this? Well, you just need a curiosity to ask questions, and I think especially if you're a young person, just go to the farmers market and start talking to some of the farmers there. Talk to some of the people selling the produce there. Say, I'm interested in this. And if you're taking a class, hopefully you're at a
Hmm.
university where there's some sort of food or farming related class. I really hope so. Increasingly, I'm seeing this at high schools, grade schools in the city too. I think that they're incorporating gardens into the schools now also, which is beautiful. So I'm very positive about this. I mean, like if I can, if me, a city girl, has fallen in love with agriculture, and I can grow, and I can also love this, and I love to eat, I am positive that there are opportunities out there for other women. And if you want to start your own agriculture, ag tech company, your own farm, I have numerous women who come up to me. afterwards and say, my dream has always to be have my own farm. And they kind of look really shy when they say that. It's almost like their words are disappearing. I'm like, what did you say?
Mm,
Oh, I just sort of have this dream, that maybe it's like, say it out loud. I would like to have a
yeah.
farm someday. And I really believe that if you say it enough, if you're passionate enough, you're curious enough, it'll happen. I really, really believe that. Maybe it's partnering with somebody else who also has something similar, like similar mission. Like I feel like Harry, you and I had some
Yeah.
similarities, right? So it's finding somebody with some
Yeah.
common passion, and then maybe you could do something together, or maybe you could find at least trade, share information together. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's taking the initiative and putting yourself out of your comfort zone. Because even there's for all the women that have come to speak to you after a screening or after reading the book, probably a percentage that were too shy to come up to you,
I
or
think so.
didn't know what to say, or to share something. So I think letting folks know that there's a variety of ways to connect with people who are doing like-minded work. Whether it's I have people sending me DMs on LinkedIn saying, I listened to your show. I'm starting a farm. I don't know where to start, but your stories have been inspiring me. So I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
like where else can I point you to? And just you want to feed that,
right.
fan that flame, so that people don't lose the hope, and they understand that there's a ton of different ways to enter this industry. I mean, I took a couple of skills that I had in, podcasting and production. And I was like, well, and I wanted to learn about the industry. So I was like, well, let me put these together and I'll create my own platform, because there was nothing that, that I could, that existed at the time. So in the same way you made the film and then you did the book, and I think just taking the initiative,
Yeah.
to create the opportunity that doesn't exist for you, and just make your own way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the hopes of that, that down the road that from Farms to Incubators is want to do is to continue to tell the stories of women, through interviews and through audio and through podcasting, but I'm a solo woman, myself. So I always find that if there are opportunities to partner or work together to tell a story, whether it's like somebody else taking the photograph and me writing the story, or whether it's somebody, you know, um, two people doing an interview or one person drawing the painting, I always find that there are just ways
Yeah,
to work together. It's very hard to actually be totally solo and do all the stories by yourself.
absolutely. So as we wrap up, Amy, given the audience, and we're a lot of folks that are in the space, that are in the industry, listen to this show, is there a specific ask you have for the listeners of this show?
Yes, I would say my specific ask is to please, if you know of a woman in ag tech, a woman, she does not have to be the founder of a company. She could be a co-founder, a leader, uh, in leadership, and it does not have to be a startup. It could be working for a large ag company too. Please email me, because we are expanding our portraits. We are launching our portrait section now. We want to have a diversity of women on that page. So please nominate her, to be part of this by emailing me directly at amy@farmstoincubators.com. Please check out our directory of women in ag tech. There's 800 plus names on there now. These are all women who submitted their own names. They want to be on there. They want to be connected with. Please go to the
Well,
Farms to Incubators website and submit your name, or get your friend to submit her name. My third ask would be that when we roll out our stories and when we put them out on our social channels, please share. Please reshare, share on your LinkedIn, on your Instagram, on your Facebook. Please use that as an opportunity to share out the stories. And then if you're interested in screening the film, in just seeing the book, in bringing the book to even go to your local library and say, can you please add this book to your collection? And the reason why I say that is so that the community can then see this book and be like, oh, interesting, women in tech,
yeah,
I did not know.
yeah,
Pay it forward by just sharing. You don't have to necessarily be part of the storytelling team, although we would love to have you. We'd love to have talent. I would love to hear from you. But in a very simple way of resharing and sharing what's out there, that would be my big ask. Yeah.
Well, we'll make sure to reshare all the links that you mentioned, and whatever's missing, just please get them to me. We'll make sure everything's in the show notes. So if you've been following along, then don't worry. Make sure everything's going to be in the show notes. Amy, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me, telling your story, which is incredibly inspiring. I'm really glad we got a chance to connect. And I feel we're going to be probably like there's opportunities for us to partner on some future media projects. So I want to make sure we stay in touch. And I'm glad we were able to share your story.
I would absolutely love that, and I will definitely look for opportunities to work together again. Thank you for all the good work that you're doing as well.